Uh, uh, uh. I was so banking on the fact that I could get like an energy drink over there, but then WWE messed up. But I have to be quiet because I'm pretty sure the 3 bodybuilders out there are wrestlers. So, with that said, how's everybody doing today? Good. Woo, woo, woo. All right. So, how's everybody feel after that review on Monday? All right. So, one thing I gotta like make clear is that like so far everything has been just kind of regurgitating everything that we've been doing from week 1, and we're just going to be saying that that's what your purpose of your second model is. It's just going to get you in that habit each week of doing the same thing, which is we got to get you thinking about the process of Maya, which is you have to do A, you got to do B, you got to do C, or D and beyond will not work. All right, which is right now it sounds like everybody's thinking about like probably how they're going to model something, right? All right. Well, we have to think as the modeling part of the pipeline as its own pipeline, which is creating your work environment, creating a project, putting that project together, putting your source images into that project, getting that set up, getting your reference set up, period, and then to block out the secondary. All right. From there, we build off of that process, which we go into the first kind of like split fork in the road for our pipeline piece. This is where we start translating into the next part of the pipeline, which is texturing and rendering. All right, what we do here is what sets up the next part. Now, before we get too much further, a couple things I want to announce. One, if you still haven't turned your project, I think today's Wednesday, right? All right, so today is the last day you can turn that in. Right now, it's 30 points off. So if you want any credit at all, please make sure that you do that. Make sure that it's worth it too. A lot of people turn in this project super late and then forget to do all the professionalism, which remember, how much is professionalism worth? A lot, like 45% of your grade. All right, so making sure that you name everything, group everything, turn it in properly. What happens if you don't turn your files in properly? What? Yes, it is considered a day late. All right, so don't screw yourself by having all those extra points taken off the late points already that are going to be taken off. All right, so definitely make sure you get that in. Also, how many people are in our Discord? All right, so do me a favor. Look, well, obviously on your right, which should be the friends list, find yourself in that list. If your name is set to update your nickname, you will be kicked by the end of this week. Make sure that you go in there and change your nickname to your first and last name as it appears on FSO. One, that's keeping it professional. Two, that helps us by locating you and your grades so we can figure out like what needs to happen. And two, please do not put your gamer tag or your Twitch stream tag or anything like, nobody cares about that. All right, so please make sure that you're keeping it professional. If you have that kind of lifestyle outside, say that for a different server. We want to keep this as professional as possible, where it's a community of artists and full self students that can help each other. Also, we've been having issues with our bot. That hopefully is fixed. So if you've been trying to get into our Discord but haven't made past the welcome page, it should be working now. So this right here, think of this as your front door, which you can't see because I need to unfreeze. All right, there we go. So one, look at your side right here, on your right side, find your name, and if it says, let's say, well, hey, everybody's doing it, I'm happy. All right, I'll find one. Right here, we have a couple of ones that are like just update your nickname, all that. If you do not change your nickname by going right here, right-clicking and going to change nickname, you will be kicked by the end of Friday. All right, you will be free to like rejoin at a later time, but if you do not change your nickname, well, guess what? The cycle will keep on happening. All right, and then likewise, if you try to join our Discord but haven't made it through the front door, which is this right here, this should be working now where you can go ahead and hit the question mark, agree. Nothing should happen when I hit that, but that will allow you into there. Also, make sure that you are keeping your questions focused, by which I mean, please declare your class and ask your class-related questions in there. I already posted in there saying that some students, mostly mine, I'll take blame for that right there, are just pretty much playing channel roulette and just posting their questions wherever. We like to keep those different sections focused, mostly because I'm not going to go to the off-topic section to look for your questions. All right. I'm looking for your questions in the 3D Studio 3DF channel right here, the main class one. So keep it focused, be aware of what you're doing, things like that. Any questions about that? All right. So let's get on with it. All right. So like I said earlier this week, we will be introducing UVs, and this will be a 2-day process. So today we're going to go over the basis of UVs, how that pertains, and how to approach them, the idea about it, and how we kind of like, start doing that inside Maya. On Friday, we'll be kind of like, finishing up the rest, but then also a review. All right, so we'll go and take those scissors on Friday and UV it, and I'll have y'all walk me through and test your knowledge of that. If we do have time, and I'll post this in the announcement on Discord, I do want people to send me their files. If you're having that issue, any kind of issues like stuff is not extruding, you're having bad geometry, things like that, send that to me. And if we have time on Friday, I'm gonna pick a couple that best illustrate like, those real world issues. And I want us as a class to fix them. So everybody can get some real world experience on how to fix people's stuff. So I will post the email address to properly send that in. But let's go with it. How many people have ever heard of UVs before? All right, a couple people. All right, so for the people who don't know, so pretty much, and I'll go ahead and read this. UVs are a coordinate system that we use to map textures to our models. While the concept can sound complex at first, you follow some guidelines, it really is not that bad. So what does that mean? So pretty much we go through the old school process of when we made something in 3D, we still had to use 2D software to actually do textures, which textures are just images that we map onto our object. So whenever you see, like, in a CG film, any kind of color on our models, any kind of detail that is like too small for us to model, that's something that we call a texture. And we have to use UVs as a way to map that out. So think of it this way. How many people have ever done paper craft? Where you like print out and like fold it into shape? Essentially, UVs is that in reverse. We take our 3D object and we start laying it flat in a way that we can properly paint on it. All right. Now, this is going to be a hard concept to get used to, but once you get used to it, UVs is actually pretty easy, especially nowadays when they have made pretty awesome tools for us to use. All right. So before we can get into UV space, we always have to think of like the first stage of our pipeline. What is our first stage of pipeline? Modeling, that's our second one. Anybody remember what our first stage is? What? Planning and pre-pro, which also goes into how we eventually want our assets to be presented at the end, whether it's film or in games. So what does that mean? Everything that we have needs to be planned on based on what the user is going to see. So if we're going to be making like our coil for Toy Story, it's the main new character instead of Forky that we have our coil. All right. So I haven't seen the movie, so I'm guessing he's like a main character in there. Then we have to plan on how detailed we need everything. What is the resolution that we're going to be rendered at? What is the resolution of the textures that we have to add onto there? Same way, if our coil is the main character of a video game, we have to plan ahead for making sure that we have enough detail that it looks realistic. Now, if it is just a random coil that's off in Fallout, then we have a little bit more scaled back. Look at that right there. So a couple things that we have to do is determine the final resolution of the asset will be displayed out, a sample, a potential UV region, see what amount of pixels you will need, and look at the potential for changing the size of the region. So what does that mean? So first off, and this will be pertaining a little bit more towards the production, but we will also touch on games as well too. So if we go right here, so one of the first things that we should really do when we're planning ahead, especially once we get into layout and figuring out where our cameras is figuring out the resolution of what we're rendering at. So how many people have ever heard of, 720p TVs, 1080p, 4K, things like that? So all of that pertains to is the resolution of our display. And it's the same way when it comes to theaters as well too. Like now with the projectors more going digital, we are actually having a physical resolution. Meanwhile, film doesn't have a resolution, but we do plan for it to go to a digital display. So one of the first things that we're going to go over is figuring out what our resolution is. So we will go over the setting a little bit more next week when we talk about rendering. And actually week 4 is when we talk about rendering. But if we go right here to what looks like a little movie clacker with a sprocket wheel on it, we can click that. This will bring up something called our render settings. We're not going to get too much to this. The main thing that we're going to be looking for is our image size. So if we scroll down to our image size, we have width and height. So in our class, what we like your resolution to be is 1080. All right, we don't drop the P because that's just standing for progressive scan. That has nothing to do with us right here. So how many people know the resolution for 1080? 1920 by 1080. How many people know the resolution for 4K? See, that's where it gets a little choppy because 4K is now a buzzword. Real 4K is actually in the 4K by width and height. Meanwhile, like TVs, they're in the like 3Ks and all that stuff right there. They add up over 4K, but we're not going to get into that. The fact is that we can enter in the actual resolution that we want right here. Or if we look right here, we also have presets. So you don't have to know every resolution. All you have to do is just know the name. So we can go to HD 1080, click that, and that will fill that out for us. So for any of y'all that are worried about like remembering a bunch of numbers, don't worry about that. We will get to those numbers in a little bit. All right. So with that said, that's all we're going to do on this page right now. And you don't even have to do it for your UVs. I want you to be aware of why we're doing it. So we got our resolution. Can anybody guess what we probably should do next? We can do that. That's already part of the cleanup process. We hopefully took care of that in the secondary form stage. So if we were rendering, what would probably be something that we should need to know? Lighting, that's part of it. We have to make sure that we can see it, but what? Textures for it. So we're waiting for like a very complex concept, but really it's staring us in the face. We need to know what we're looking at, all right? We don't know where the framing is. So, like I said, everything that we do, we have to plan for our final shot. So to do that, we're going to go to View, Camera Settings, and turn on Resolution Gate. And you'll see why. Now we're knowing what we're looking at. All right, so that is our 1920 by 1080. So now we know what's in shot. That's important because what is the purpose of doing anything that's outside the shot? Like when we're doing Spider-Man, do we model all of Manhattan or do we model what's in frame? All right, what's up? If we go to View, Camera Settings, and then Resolution Gate. And that will turn on our framing. So, going back to that pre-production that I kind of skipped over because hopefully they were showing you in like R2, like, you know, the idea of storyboarding and planning ahead. That's what we're setting up for. This would have been storyboarded a long time ago. So we would have figured out where our main character, the Coil, and his amazing misadventures would be happening in this frame. So let's say this is our product shot. We're trying to sell this as our new character. We got to figure out how close our subjects are going to see it, our audience. So usually what we do is just kind of take a ratio look at it right here. So we got like 1080 right here from top to bottom. Let me also do that also for online. So we have 1080 from right here to right here. Rough estimate, how much is my surface is that taking up? Yeah, we're not the total area, just rough estimate. Like if we're looking from like top to bottom, like 1,080 pixels from top to bottom. All right, how much of that 1080 is that really kind of taking up? About 1,000. All right, even like a rough estimate, we're looking at like, hey, it's taking up like 75%, 80%. That's the logic right there. I know it sounds pretty complicated, but the reason why we have to figure that out is that's where we get into texture resolution. Has anybody ever heard of texture resolution? Let me say that louder. All right, so the resolution of a texture is the same as a resolution of an image. All right, the more pixels, the more information, the more clear something looks. All right, likewise, the lower it is, the more pixelated, blocky, cruddy it looks. And that's where we get into the actual numbers that you'll probably have to learn, which is our resolution. All right, so this right here is probably more better suited for gaming right here. So we have way in this corner right here are 64 pixels by 64 pixels. That's something that you would have probably seen back on, obviously, the N64, probably even like, you know, the DS, also the 3DS, because that has a smaller screen, smaller resolution. We don't need that much detail. That goes up to 128 by 128. Next is 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024, and then 2048 by 2048. Does anybody notice a pattern between those? They're doubling. Anything else? They're divisible by 4. They're squares. So all 3 of those are right. And that is just a standard of what we do right there. We use a unit of 2. So 2, 4, 8, 16, 24, all the way up. Granted, we forgot about those below 64 a long time ago. They're just so low resolution. But the fact is that we use a combination of those. And also, like you said, it's square. And that'll make a little bit more sense once we get into UVing. But another thing that we need to be aware of is, fact is, you would think, hey, you know what? We need high resolution. Let's just put a high resolution map on everything, all right? You know, we'll put it on our main character. We'll put it on, like, you know, the coffee can that he's like drinking out of, put it on his shoes, things like that. Why would we not want to do that? What? It takes up a lot of space, so it takes up hard drive space. We have to process and load it, so it takes up memory space. So if we're on like a computer or a game console, that takes out memory. It has to like load it up, so it makes load times longer, and also takes away from the memory. It makes stuff go a little bit slower. What's another thing? It's the same thing with like production. It makes rendering longer. So that's where we get into trade-off. That's where we have to kind of look at everything. So if we go back to right here, knowing the number of our textures, what can we probably do? Like, what type of texture should I put on there? What? Like what resolution? What? The medium one, so like it's taking up maybe about 70% of that 1080, so probably the 1024, so the 1000 one. All right, we can keep the numbers simple. We can say 1000 to 501, things like that. How about this one right here? That's taking up almost nothing. So what can we do with that one right there? Yeah, 128 right there. It's barely taking up anything. If that's the closest that we're going to see it, we can break it down that way. So the idea is that we have to figure out how we're going to maximize our results by also making sure that we also produce a product that can be used. All right. There's no point of making like this amazing, beautiful video game that no one can run. It was called Crysis. All right. So the fact is that, like, you know, we don't want to wait for like 3 or 4 generations of computers for something to run properly. Same way with our film. We have due dates. We have a release date. If we spend way too much time rendering, we miss those. All right. So with that said, let's go right here and talk about a couple key things that we need to worry about. All right. So how's everybody doing so far? All right. One person's answering for y'all. All right. So the thing is that we have to pre-plan. We have to be aware of our end results and how much resolution we're going to need. The key thing is you have to be aware of what your final product is going to be and how we see it. All right. You can't just blindly start doing something and then just hope that it turns out okay at the end. What's up? Yep. Yep. Yes. Yeah, and we'll talk about that like last week. It's something called LODs. It's the idea of that, like in a video game, everything doesn't need to be completely high quality depending on the distance it is for you. So like, let's say you're right there, high quality model. You're right there in the middle, mid quality model. You all the way back there, you can literally just put a plane that we put like a low quality texture on. How many people played like the old school Madden and managed to get into the stadium where you saw the crowd? There was no way of like modeling. They just put a whole bunch of like boards with textures on them, right? And that just gave the idea, because why would you be looking in the stadium? You're playing a video game, all right? So that is the concept in the pre-pro that we always do with our production. So let's go right here. Start looking at our model. All right, so before we get into the concepts that we need to be aware of when we use UVs, let's kind of look at like the workflow that we're going to use. So we got our object right here. We already figured out what we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera settings and resolution gate. So go to no gate, we're good. All right, so first thing that we're going to do is change our workspace. Where's our workspace? Where's our workspace menu? What? Right-hand corner, exactly. So we can change this from Maya. Usually most of y'all are probably on Maya Classic or Maya Standard. We can go to UV editing, all right? And this will pull up a workspace for us. So right here, we have, wrong thing. Let me actually load up the right scene. That would help y'all. All right, ready UV. Save. Yes, so it's already like modeled. Like I do a lot of Betty Crocker stuff. Like, you know, I'll show you how to make it, and then I'll pull the fresh cake out of the oven. The same thing. So we're just not wasting too much time. So this right here is what we call our UV editor. We go to workspace, go to UV editing. This will load up by default this. Do me a favor, right next to the workspace, there is a lock. Click that lock. The reason why you want to click that lock is that will prevent you from accidentally like undocking stuff and changing that setting. So that way you can pop back over there if anything goes wrong, right? So once you lock it, you lock that UV, and there's no worry about accidentally undocking and ruining stuff, right? So if you're one of those people that have a hard time following along in the tutorials, just because like, you know, some of the UI is differently, make sure that you're using that lock. All right, so right here is our UV editor. And when we get in there, this is where we mess around with our UVs. So our UVs are not like our models. For every time you make a vert, by nature, you already create a UV. But the thing is, the difference between a UV and a vert is you can go in there and delete face and delete the edge. You can't really destroy a UV to the point where you mess it up and have to start over, because it is actually inherently attached to your model. So if we go right here and click this, as you can see, we get a whole bunch of lines because that is our UVs. That's how Maya by default is kind of looking at our object and kind of laying it flat. No matter what I do, so like let's say I completely like mess these up and jack them up beyond recognition. It's never one of those situations where I have to go, oh my God, I have to restart my coil. That's because all I need to do is just reset them and I'm back at square one. So that's one of the perks of UV. So if I go right here and reset them, we're back at square one and we can start working on again. You can't destroy them. You can only just reset them and just try again. Every one of your objects has UVs tied to them. And we'll go over that resetting in a second. All right. Now, the whole concept is we need to take this model and lay it flat so we can go and paint it. But we have to keep a couple concepts in there. So, one, first thing that we have to be aware of is, like with anything, if we take something 3D and lay it flat, what is something that we probably have to do with it? Think about, like, you know, how we're taking skin off of an orange and trying to lay that flat. What would we have to do? What? Peel it? Also kind of tears it, kind of cuts it. So we have to think about seams. Another way to think about it is look at your shirt that you have on. It wasn't a 3D piece of clothing. It has seams that were sewn together. So if we were to actually undo those seams, that's essentially what UV is. We have to make those cuts so stuff lays flat. So that brings us to our first concept. Seams, right here. So seams are not a bad thing. And actually a couple things that we need to go over. There's going to be a seesaw situation between seams and when we talk about stretching. One is not worse than the other. It just depends on what your skill type is with that right there. But for us to lay something down flat without any stretching, we have to cut in seams. The thing is that we have to be aware of is that we need to put them in ways that they are uniform and places that we could probably hide them. So going back to our shirt, we have a seam right here. A couple things that we notice right here. One, it's uniform, so it's not like, you know, randomly drawn across my chest, unless, I don't know, like it's one of those trendy shirts, I don't know. But the fact is that, like, it's uniform. It makes sense. It's a straight line. If I was to lay this flat, it would be straight. All right. Two is that, you know, it's hitting in a place that makes sense. So when we talk about seams, we have to paint across them as if there's no seam there whatsoever. So that means going into Photoshop, making sure that everything kind of adds up when they connect. So if we can put them in areas that minimizes our audience seeing where that seam is, then it makes our job a little bit easier. So if we were to look at this right here, where are some places on this that we could probably hide seams? What? Yes, exactly. So right by the lip of the edge right here. So like if we look right here, that edge, we could probably hide it there. Why? It's pretty hard to see, all right? Any area where there's a great change of angle, we could probably hide a seam there and make it a little bit easier to paint. Would we want to put like a seam right there? No, because that's directly in our view. Also, that's directly in the area that logically, what would probably be there? Like the front or a label, all right? So that's what we have to think about. We need to make sure that we're putting in just enough seams that we can lay it flat, also put them in areas that make sense, whether we can hide them or they're in an obvious area that there would be a crease. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is stretching. So seams and stretching go hand in hand, all right? So if you want less stretching, you have to have more seams. If you want to have less seams, you have to deal with more stretching. At their different ranges, they become a problem. But if we can kind of get into that middle area, we're okay. So what does that mean? First, let's go ahead and put like a quick checker texture on here. And then I'm gonna go right here. Let's go that down so we can get bigger checkers. And let me just start squeezing that out. All right, so can anybody see what's going on right here? All right, so what's going on here? They're stretching. Why is it stretching? How do we know that's stretching? Exactly. Like our texture is squares. Are we seeing squares? Well, no, we're seeing a bunch of rectangles and stuff like that. And that's the point. Our stretching starts interfering with how it displays our texture. We spent all that hard work making our texture, adding in that detail. We want to make sure that our UVs are properly displaying that information. All right. So obviously right here, we would go and kind of square that up and make sure that that is checkered. But now we're getting some areas where we're starting to stretch as well too. That's where we start making that combination between putting in a seam and then also dealing with stretching. So like that area where it's starting to fall off, that would be an area where we would probably cut and make a seam. All right, so that seams, that's stretching. The next thing that we also have to be worried about is something called overlap. All right, so think about every one of these UVs, which, going back, I didn't really explain. This right here, when we go into texture space, U is up, V is left and right, and that's just our coordinate system. So quickly, that's what UVs are. All right, so when it comes to this right here, every one of our UVs is a coordinate on our map. All right, it is a place in our geography of like where our texture goes. So can anybody think why I would never want stuff overlapping? Like if I was a texture, like let's say myself, and I overlap my hand over my face, can anybody kind of logically think what would probably happen? What? Yes, exactly. So there's only one way to really display an image, and it's in this area right here. So when we start overlapping, overlapping means that two areas of overlapping get the same information. So if I have a hand here over my face, and then I put my face image right here, then I will magically have a face hand. All right, so that's the same thing right there, is that we have to pay attention to how we overlap. Not saying that you can't do that. We do that a lot in games, just because it saves texture space. I don't need to do like a brand new texture for every piece of wood in my fence. Overlap those and save some space. So I can do like 3 or 4 like textures for a fence post, and then overlap randomly a bunch of UVs, so we can kind of get that look of randomness on our stuff. But let's say if I'm doing a game character, I would need to make sure that like, hey, I'm not overlapping anything. Everything is getting its own information. And that goes a lot more into when we talk about bump mapping a little bit more. All right, so that's UVs. So again, I'm just outlaying the concepts. When we start UVing, we're going to actually put those to practice. Likewise, if you go into our Discord, we also have these on the announcements, and we already talked about that. So reduce stretching, and a couple last ones right here. Next is 0 to 1. Man, I don't know why I'm so sweaty. All right, so next is 0 to 1. So how many people remember geometry back from like junior high or high school? All right, how many people remember graphing stuff? Like, you know, like you have X and Y and the 0, 1, all that stuff right here. It's the same concept right here. So we have 0 at this point. So whenever you see that green line and that red line, that means that's our origin right there. And then it all goes all the way from 0 to 1. So let me point that out to online as well too. So this is our origin right here where these two lines are. And then we start at 0 and go all to 1. Same way with when we go up in the V, well, actually up in the U, we go from 0 to 1 as well too. Why is that important? That's because we see all those squares right there, right? That's not actually usable space. The only place that our texture by default displays is in this 0 to 1 space. That's the only place by default that it displays. So anything that goes outside of that, literally all this is doing is just, when we go outside of that range, it's just displaying that texture right here all over again. Shows it again over here. So it's just tiling it over and over and over again. Now, there's ways to make these display something else, but we're not going to talk about that. That's going to be something more advanced later on in the degree program. But Can anybody think why I would not want anything to go outside the 0 to 1 space if we know that it's tiling? So yeah, what she said is that like if we have something particular like a label, you don't want to cut off or anything like that. And that's one of the right concepts. A better way to describe it is once we go outside of that 0 to 1 space, what displays on our model becomes unpredictable. All right, we don't know what's going on outside of there. It's a no man's land. It's just repeating our texture. So whatever goes outside of that, it's just the luck of the draw, whether it looks fine. Thing is that anything that we put inside that 0 to 1 space, we can paint and be 100% sure that it's going to display the way that we want it. All right, so think of 0 to 1 space as our home grid. We got to put everything inside there. All right, and then the last thing. Is a concept that sounds scary, but it's pretty basic, which is textile density. All textile density means is literally when you put your UVs in that 0 to 1 space, how many pixels are in that area. And the reason why that's important is because, let's say, and I got some default UVs that I can play around with right here. Let's say I take this one right here, make that really small, and then Control 1. I'm going to take this and make that really huge. Take this and make that look, I don't know, gigantic. Yeah. And this is what we would call pretty bad textile density. Can anybody tell me why that would be a problem? So if we look at like the different squares and all that right there. All right, so she was exactly right. She's saying is that all the details would look different sizes. And that's exactly right. Everything is getting different resolution. So we have our bracket that's getting a ton of resolution. Meanwhile, our bigger thing right here is barely getting any resolution. So think of this right here, PlayStation 4. Think of this right here, original Minecraft. All right, and that's all on the same object. All right, and that's visually jarring, and that just looks crappy. So we have to make sure that everything has the same textile density at least, because at least when you look at it, everything looks consistent. You don't want to look in the object and see really nice detail and then go right here and see individual pixels. So with that said, let's go through the process of UVing. So when we UV, we do something called projecting. So the idea is that we're not essentially taking this and cutting it apart. We're selecting areas and taking almost a projector and projecting a 2D image on it, right? It's a weird concept, but once you get past it, it makes a little bit more sense. And what does that mean? So we have a couple things that we can project with. So if we go right here to UV, I'm going to turn off this grid for now. Wonder if my mic's picking that up. All right, so if we go right here, and I'm gonna go ahead and go right here to UV, and this is where we get to most of our UV tools. But we also have a different area where we can get to it as well, and we'll show that in a minute. So we go to UV, I'm gonna rip off this tab by clicking this dotted line, so we can kind of get that and just show you what's going on. All right, so when we project, we have a couple things that we can project with. So we have planar, cylindrical, spherical, and camera-based. We do also have other different ones, but we're not going to worry about those for right now. So when we think planar projection, what would you think that would probably, real world example of that? What would that probably be? A planar projection. Yeah, just a projector. That right there, projecting onto a flat square surface like that, that is a planar projecting. So if I go and select this and hit planar, it gives me the option to do a couple things. One, I can project down the x-axis or the y-axis or the z-axis. So let's say I want to get this right here. Where would I aim down? Online. You can probably see the compass a little bit better. So if I wanted to get a shot from this angle and project that way, what axis would I do? I heard somebody say it. I was waiting for online. It's okay, man. All right, so keep it going. Yes. So the best way to kind of approach this right here is figure out which one we're looking down the barrel of. And if we look at the axis right here, we're seeing that there's no Z there. So we're looking down the Z. So we go right here, hit Z, and that's essentially what it's doing. Is there's our hole, there's our bracket right there, there's our bracket. It literally took that whole entire thing and squished it flat as if we were projecting an image onto it. And how that illustrates is if I go right here and actually kind of unstretch it a little bit. And scale that down so we get bigger ones right here. And with that concept right there, from that angle, from our Z axis, without moving, that looks pretty good. There's no stretching. But why would we have other projections? That's because once we start going and moving around, we can start seeing where that projection falls off, right? So we have to do a different combinations of those. So the key is to kind of figure out how we're going to see our angles. Where are the broadsides and where's areas where we have to kind of wrap around and do another type of projection, which is something called a cylindrical projection. Think of it as a projector that hugs you, all right? It wraps its arms around you and projects everything inside. So if we go right here and instead, with that selected, go to UVs, and I still have that window up. We can go to cylindrical. And this will give us what looks like a half pipe. And once I kind of scale that down or scale that out a little bit, all right, there we go. We can see now around this curved surface, we're actually getting pretty good display of our texture. We're not getting perfect. Like some of these are a little bit closer to rectangles. Some of these are a little bit closer to squares. We can kind of tweak that. So that's looking pretty good. But we're getting areas where are pretty broad-sided and flat that we're getting some major stretching on. So usually what I like to think about is if you can see an area from one angle or one axis, that's planar mapping. If it's something that you literally have to, I'll use this as my thing right here, go around to see all the sides, that would be something that needs to be cylindrical mapping. All right, so what would you think a spherical would be used for? Sphere. All right, so just because it's named something like that doesn't mean that it's actually good at doing that. So I will tell you honestly, I very rarely ever use spherical, because even with a sphere, I'll go right here, and so far, like if I was to do a cylindrical mapping of like a cylinder, for the most part, it would lay it out. If I do a planar mapping of a plane, that would definitely do the job. The fact is that if I go right here and do spherical, then we get this weird, like little point at the top right here, and that weird top right there. That's because it doesn't know what to do with those poles. I will let you know though, spherical, we do use that some when it comes to human heads, all right? Mostly because we have to take in the concept that we have to kind of cut off this top layer right here, and then the little bottom part of the neck right there, and then it's pretty good about laying that flat. So, just kind of let y'all know, all right? So, with that said, does everybody kind of understand the idea of projections and how that relates to our UVs. The idea is that we're projecting and telling it how we want to project our 2D image, whatever we paint in Photoshop, that's how we want to project it, all right? Now, everything I've shown you is I've been clicking the object and hitting projecting, and it's been doing the whole entire thing. This is where we get into cutting. So instead of selecting the whole thing, we can pick ranges. So if I go right here and select faces, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I can tell that only that part that's selected to go right here and cylindrical map and tell it to only be cylindrical mapped. And then I can pick areas that I know are going to be better planar map, selecting those faces and hitting planar map. Sounds easy, right? Yeah, pretty basic. But there's a way better tool. All right, so how many people have 2019? Everybody should. Everybody should be raising their hand. Everybody participate. All right, you should be on 2019. Hopefully be on 2019.2. Granted, this was introduced in the last 2018. So we have something called UV 3D cut and sew tool. So essentially, we can take almost the idea of projections bit by bit and piece by piece out of the equation. We can instead intuitively go in there and just start cutting in our seams. So we can think about the ideas of projecting, but we can just go in there and cut the areas apart really easily. All right. What that looks like is, let's go right here. Don't, cancel. Let me go right here and save because I have not saved in a while. Quill, UV, 001. Save as. And let me bring that back. Oh, did I hide it? I think I hit it. Where did it go? So we can go right here. I'm gonna go to display, show all. Try to force that. All right, screw this. Open, and we're just gonna go back to ready to UV. All right, continue. All right, so we're gonna go with this one right here. All right, so oh, it's glitching out. All right, so with that there, we can go. Sorry about that. Let's go to UV, and we can do something called a 3D cut and sew tool. So we can bring that up. And what that allows us to do is we can start making cuts. So let's say I'm gonna look down the barrel in here. What areas do I see completely looking straight down? So what areas of my model do I see looking straight down at my model? Think about this right here. Planar versus cylindrical. All right, so like right there, like the edge of the rim. Do I see all of that? Yeah, so we go right here. Let's say that's where I stop seeing the top of this right here. Likewise, I stop seeing the top of that. And then right here, I can see the top of this right here. So now I cut that apart. To do that, I can just pick the edge where I feel like that projection's falling off. So what I like to do is pick where I can actually see straight down or see from one axis. So the idea of planar projection. I select it where it starts falling off, where I have to start turning my camera to see the rest of it. And then I make that cut by just clicking on it and double clicking. Same way, I can see the top of this rim. but it starts falling off right about here. So I can click that. But then I can see the top of my coil right here. So I'll select right here to contain that as well too. So now I'm cutting those apart. Now, let's say I don't like the look of that. I can hold down Control and double click that edge to sew it back together. So just clicking on the edge will cut it. Holding down Control will sew it back together. Now, I missed one step on purpose because I want everybody to put a huge asterisk next to this right here, because before you start doing your UVs, you need to do 3 things. Everybody ready? Everybody ready for the 3 things? I see some people going like, whatever. It's recorded. All right, so 1, you need to be done with your model. You cannot be making any more changes, adding any more details, anything like that, because while your UVs are tied to your vertexes, they don't move when you move your vertex. So let's say we go ahead and lay this out perfectly. And then I decide, let's add like a weird ridge right here. All right. Those UVs are there, but they didn't make the adjustment for the fact that now we have new texture area and they've been moved. So now we have extra UVs that are on top of each other. We have UVs that are now stretching. So that's why you save UVing to last. You want to make sure that you're completely done modeling. No more adding details, no more using your multi-cut tool, no more extruding. Next is, you need to make sure that your surface is problem geometry free. So how many people are still in the process of cleaning up the problem geo on their coil? Continue doing that, all right? Because it needs to be free of problem geometry, because it will affect how some of our later tools that I'm going to show you that will make your life way easier, it will prevent them from working properly, all right? So first, be done, completely done with your model. 2, make sure that it's completely done. And then 3, this is the process that like everybody forgets, which is you have to reset your UVs. Now, I will let you know, there is no option called reset UVs. You can't go into UVs and hit reset UVs. It's just a term that we use, which means when you model, as you're modeling stuff, as you're kind of building things, it kind of tears apart your UVs. It adds like little micro cuts. It like separates them. It makes them sew together in weird ways. You don't want to start UVing with that trash, all right? So we have to do something that will actually go back and sew everything back together. So if you remember me talking about the different projections, which was planar mapping, cylindrical mapping, and then spherical mapping, I also said a 4th one, which is what I prefer to do. I will let you know Tim does it a different way. It's the same idea. So what I like to do is select my UVs and go to UV, camera based. What that does is actually project from the direction that my camera is looking at it. What does that do? Really, it took me back to square one. All right, it re-projected my UVs, but it did something that I need to happen, which is it went back and made sure that everything was sewn back together. There's no little hidden cuts anywhere. There's no tiny tears. There's no weird sewn together things. And also another thing that I like is that I can kind of see the whole entire model right here. So I get an idea of where, you know, like my depth is. I can start making weird cuts, so things like that. But the key thing is you have to reset your UVs. You either do the planar from the Y or method that like that Tim does, or you can do that one right there. But the key thing is that it ends up with the same result. It makes sure that everything is sewn back together, that you're not trying to UV with some jacked up mess. So while I'm trying to get my cap and screw it back on, can everybody tell me the 3 things that you have to do? Don't trip over each other. All right, what? First one? Finish with your model. Clean your geometry. Third one? Reset your UVs. This is very important because I will tell you, I will get like 50 emails this weekend going like, hey, my tools are not working. And I will be like, hey, did you reset your UVs? What's that? All right. So that is very imperative. That is the first thing that you should be doing before you even start cutting things apart. So with that said, let's start kind of going through this again, now that we have everything reset. Couple things that you may have noticed, that I'm not getting that weird white line that was going through the whole entire object. That's because I had a prior cut there that now, since I reset, is sewed that back together. So let's go right here to UVs, 3D cut and sew tool, and start cutting this apart. So I'm looking down the Y. We've already been through this a couple times, so I'm going to figure out where this is falling apart. So one of the things I can do is, if it helps you, we can use the projections to kind of get an idea of what we need to do. So if I go in planar, I'm looking down the Y. Let me hit Y. I have to make sure that's selected. All right, so Y, apply, and I'll put a checkered on. And this is where why I'm talking about when I'm saying areas where it's falling off. So if we look at this rim right here, we're getting kind of decent squares, but we can start seeing where it's starting to smear a little bit right here. So that's where we would logically start making cuts. So if we go right here to 3D cut and sew, and select that, so right there, right there. Now I look for the next area where it's starting to like hold itself together. So this part right here, which is pretty flat, that's looking pretty good. So I start looking where that starts smearing, which looks to be right about there. Now, here's a good rule of thumb. How many people have been beveling their edges? All right. Beveling is a great place to make your cuts. All right. You go kind of in the middle of where your bevel is. That's a great indicator of a good change in direction and where you should be putting a cut. So I have a bevel right here. So I'm going to pick the one in the middle. So I'm doing all that. That's all fine and dandy. But what is it actually doing? Well, if I go right here, turn that off. Essentially, what I'm doing is cutting apart and making something called a UV shell. All right. So we already went over what a UV is. UV is a point in UV space. When we have a cluster of UVs that are connected to each other, that is called a UV shell. And that is essentially what we're ripping apart. So if I go right here, and let's say I double click this one right here. I select the UV and all the UVs that it's connected to. And I can pull that over, and now I have that UV shell. And just by looking at that UV shell, I can see that it properly emulates what this shape is doing. It's not skewing, it's not turning into an oval, it's not making a high five shape. The fact is that it is portraying what that shape is doing, but in 2D view. So now I can go ahead and start pulling some of these things apart. So we got the top of my rim right here. We got that part right there. So let's start going around here. So who wants to take a chance and kind of answer where we probably should put another cut? If you need me to put up the checkers again, I'm more than happy to. Does anybody need the checkers? Anybody? All right. Yes, one person. All right. So and let me get out of this mode. Oh, it's not displaying. Oh, my computer's doing that weird glitch where I have to constantly pop it in and out for it to update. Not happy about that. All right, so Whatever. All right. All right, so don't know why it's not doing that. So we are going to all right. All right, we're gonna close down Maya for a second. So pause. UV 001. Save as. See what we're getting on this right here. Main class shut. Yeah. How's everybody doing? I would do better if that wasn't glitching out. So it's not y'all. Sometimes it can happen to us as well too. Sometimes the best solution is to just close down Maya, reopen it. So open, and then we can probably go right here. All right, turn the lights back on. Get rid of this nonsense. There we go. All right, so, and let me go ahead and grab the 3D cut and sew tool. All right, so we finally have our checkers back up. I'm not hit Control 1. We are just going to maneuver around this. Control hide. All right, bring that back. All right, so we got our checkers on. So let's kind of think about like where areas that like it is displaying properly and where it's starting to fall off. All right, so we look right here. Would this side of this rim right here be a planar projection? No. All right. What about the underneath? Yes. All right. So we'll go right here with a tool, make that cut. All right, and then we'll start looking to where it starts falling off. Where does it start falling off and stretching and looking like crap? The first line? Yeah. So yeah, we'll go right there. All right, so the side's looking pretty terrible. Are we seeing anything that looks okay? So probably right about there, we start seeing that it looks good. Starting to see that stretching a little bit, so probably would make a cut there. And then it's starting to look okay around here. So as we do that, like I said, we are essentially just making a bunch of tiny little shells right here. So we're just kind of ripping it based off of where our projection's starting to fall off. And we turn that off. Yes, so like I said, with everything that we've been doing, we can't think of a concept as a whole. We have to start breaking it down to smaller bits so we can focus on that a little bit at a time. That way it keeps us focused and keeps us from not being too stressed and worrying about too much other things. So we got pretty much all our planar projection figured out. So what about the areas that are kind of falling apart? That's where we get into cylindrical projection. So can anybody kind of guess logically what would be the difference between a planar projection and a cylindrical mapping? I mean cylindrical projection. other than the fact that they have the same two different terms. All right, so with a planar projection, we project, and it's flat, right? So let's say I have a shape like this. For it to lay flat, what do I have to do? What? Cut it. Where do I cut? Yeah, right here. So if we have a cylindrical map, we have to make a cut vertical so it unfolds like this. So you open up the hug. All right. So with that logic, for our stuff to lay out flat, we have to pick an area to make that vertical cut. So we go right here and cut. Now we have an area where it can lay flat. Now you're probably going, but it's not flat. What's going on? Because everything we've been doing is like with a projection. So it projects and it kind of like lays it out for us. While we're using this tool that's just making a whole bunch of cuts and leaving everything it is. This is where we get into something that is called the unfold tool. This is everything that we're working towards. The unfold tool literally looks at our geometry and then looks at our UVs and calculates how it should be laid flat. But it's not a miracle worker. We have to kind of set up the perfect scenarios for it to actually do its job. So, to show you what I mean, let me figure out where that shell is. UV shell, select that. So, right now we projected from the Y. That's all collapsed on top of itself. Let me go right here and save. Yeah. So, if you remember me earlier saying in the UVs, right here, this is where we get to a lot of our tools, but there's another area where we can get to it. Let me introduce you to the tab, the UV toolkit. So it's a little tab right there. By default, it should pop up if you go into UV editing. This is almost every tool that you will be using for your UVs. And if we keep on going down, we see a little section right here that is called unfold. We open that up, we see a couple unfolds. We'll talk about the difference between them, but the one that we're going to pay attention to is unfold. So if I select this and click this right here, unfold, it will do its best to lay this as flat as possible. So literally it took it, looked at where the cuts are, looked at my geometry, and then it tried to lay it flat to match my geometry. All right. So this is not a miracle worker. That's why we have to put those cuts in. That's how we have to, like, look at where our textures are starting to fall off. And then we also have to vertical cut where it can open up. So, few things. One, it didn't do its job perfectly. So we're not going to expect that it's going to do all our work for us. If Maya was just a couple buttons that we can press and it does everything for us, no one would pay you. All right, that's the key of the factor. So we have to make some kind of corrections right here. So one, we unfold it, but now we have this bowing right here. Can you tell me why that bowing look would probably be kind of a pain in the ass? What's up? Yes, caused because of the bevels. But why would that slight curve be an issue? What? Yeah, she's definitely on the right path right there, which she said it makes straight lines curve. So if we think about right there, that's this part of our coil. So what would typically be on that top part of that coil? If we were thinking about a texture, what would be there? A label? Yes, a label. All right. So if we had to paint that label on that right there, we would have to go make our label and then curve it to that distortion. That's pain in the butt. That is working the opposite way. So we can do something that is called straightening. So UVs. And underneath it, we have something called straighten. And I'm just going to click it, and then I'm going to tell you why you don't want to just click it after that. Go right here, hit unfold, So that worked perfectly fine. So what that does is it looks at our UVs and looks at how close it is to either the U or the V line, and then it will move it to be straight up on it. It does have a threshold. So if you look next to it, we have this 30. Think of that as the tolerance, all right? So it's going to look at like how close it is to like the U and the V, and it's going to pick the one that is closest inside that tolerance. So that 30 is like literally an angle degree, all right? So I would never go higher than 50, not 50, 40. And another thing that we have to be prepared for is this. If you didn't notice earlier, it originally was like this. And I went ahead and kind of straightened it up like that. Can anybody tell me why? Oh, no, I mean, like, why did I turn it before I straightened UVs? Exactly, it's looking at that right there, and that's how it's figuring out. So if I have it weirdly angled like this, which I've already seen people on Discord have this issue, and I hit straighten, we're going to get this weird elbow bend, all right? So that's part of us as artists. We have tools that can really help us, but they're not miracle workers. We have to set up conditions where they can succeed. Unfold, we have to put in the proper cuts. Straighten, we also have to make sure to do a little bit of straighten by hand to get it to where it can do its job. Now, with that said, I forgot one step before I do unfold and straighten, which is you bet your butt you need to save before using these tools. Because this is pretty simple, but you probably didn't notice off to the side there was a progress bar where Maya has to go through and calculate stuff. And I will tell you, when Maya's calculating stuff, that is when it's more likely going to crash. All right? So a lot of people will go through, do all their cuts, separate everything, and then go and hit unfold and just watch it crash, and they lose all that work. All right? So good rule of thumb, if you're going to straighten or unfold, make sure that you save first. All right? So let me kind of go through, kind of make the rest of these cuts right here, just to show you like the strength of the straighten, because again, we're going to be doing some UVing today. We're going to be doing UVing on Friday. And I'll usually have people come up on Friday and kind of walk me through. And then it's almost like a game show where it's just like, are you sure you're good? All right, let's hit the unfold. And this is what we're looking for. Go right here, cut that. Now, is anybody noticing when I'm making that vertical cut where I'm putting it? What would the logic be on that right there? So again, that's a cut, which is when I make a cut, what is that called? I think I heard somebody say it. A seam? That's what I'm making is a seam, all right? So one, I want to make sure all the seams are lining up on one direction. I don't want to have a seam here and then a seam here and then a seam here, because then that is just something that I have to like worry about later. Two, on that coil, if it's a vertical line like that, where would I put a seam on that coil? What would make logical sense for that? Let me hear somebody over here. Where would I put a vertical seam like that on that coil? What? Well, it's along the side right there. Online. Any ideas? Already heard you say it. You were right. But anybody think? Think about how our final shot is. What was our product shot on that? How was it facing? So if I have a big gnarly seam on it, where should that seam be facing? Back of coil. All right. So again, simple concepts is just thinking about how we're going to represent it and where we need to put those cuts. So if I'm going to have the big gnarly seam, let's face it away from the camera. We know where our object's going to be, how it's framed up. Let's put the seam away from the camera. Then we don't have to spend that much time cutting it out. So go right here, make that cut. All right, so going back how I was saying, like, hey, I'll have y'all make cuts on Friday. And then I'll ask you if you're sure, because I'll go right here and select everything and see if you were good. So if we go right here and hit unfold, we'll look and see, hey, that's laid out flat, that's laid out flat, that's laid out flat. Oh, that's kind of making a C shape. So we probably didn't need a cut there. All right. And we'll get to that bottom in a second. But everything else is looking pretty flat. And that's what we're looking for. Oh no, nothing's working right today. Ignore. All right. So how's everybody feeling about cuts and unfolding? Just a concept. All right. We need to make cuts so stuff lays flat, and we can use fold to make laying stuff flat a little bit faster. All right. So going back to when we were talking about seams, remember how like one of the objectives is try to minimize seams as much as possible? This is where we get into that seesaw of like, you know, hey, we can have more seams and less stretching, or less stretching, more stretching and less seams. And that's where we wiggle between that seesaw. All right. So if you know something about the top and the bottom, we could probably get away with less seams. And that's where us as an artist, we have to make that decision. So what does that mean? So at this bottom, remember how I made, you know, cut here, cut here, and cut here? We could probably just get away with this being sewn back together, this being sewn back together, and this whole entire bottom part right there being one piece. Now, how many people are frightened by seeing that right there? All right, so again, a couple people raised their hands. Why should we not be frightened by that? Yes, exactly. Remember, we can't destroy our UVs like we do our models, all right? How many people hit a point with their model where they're going like, oh crap, I have to restart that? That's true with modeling. Modeling, you can get geometry to the point where it's just easier to just burn down the house and rebuild it, all right? That's just the true fact of it, all right? But UVs, they're always there. They're always that buddy that never goes away, all right? I love these analogies. I'm not even really paying attention to them. All right, so what does that mean? I can just go right here with that selected, that gnarly mess, and go to camera based. Gotta make sure that I got that selected in face mode. Well, UV shell. And then UVs, camera based. And now I'm back to square one. All right, so that's all put together. It's no longer a scary worm shape. And now I can hit unfold. But what did I accomplish? Go right here, scale that down. And let's look at it. All right, so let me scale that down a little bit more. All right, so if we're looking at, we notice a few things. One, we're getting a little bit of stretching in this area, right there. But is it bad? How many people notice that stretching? A couple people, all right? Is it after you stared at the bottom of this coil for a very long time? All right, that's the idea right there. We can save us time on having to paint out and have a little bit of stretching, especially in an area where more than likely you're never going to see. All right, so those are those judgment calls. Even with the top, we can get the same thing right here. Now we don't want to go too extreme, so I know some people kind of take this and run with it and then try to get like almost the entire coil in one little thing. There is some areas where we have to kind of put seams in, but yeah, for this right here, since it's the top of this rim, and this is going, what's right here? The black top is covering that. So let's put that all together. with that, and camera-based selection. We gotta make sure that we're in face mode. And camera-based. Got that. We're going to unfold. And I'm breaking my cardinal rule by not saving before unfolding. But like I said, I'm Betty Crocker. I already have one of these done already. All right, so because we're going to get to one point where you do not want to sit and watch me for 25 minutes like I do something. All right, so as I said, seesaw effect right here. Yeah, we can see some stretching. But what's going on with that ridge? She's already answered it, but like logically, what's going on with that ridge? It's stretching. What's there? If we're looking at our final shot and thinking about our final shot, what's there? The black top. So it was cut up. So who cares about seam? Who cares about like stretching? Stat logic over and over again. Same way, how many people play like a Fallout game? All right, how many people looked at the textures on every little thing that you picked up? There's texture seams, there's bad texturing everywhere. Because here's the point, you're not supposed to look at that stuff for long, all right? They're only there to kind of add the element of an environment to it. And the fact is that, like, yeah, you're going to be your worst critic, all right? But the thing is, most of the people out there are not going to notice. So that's where we gauge stuff to make, one, our life easier, and two, make the person next in the pipeline life easier as well too. So, cutting in seams, how are we doing on that? I see some people asleep, all right? It's okay. It can be a boring thing right here, but I want to make sure that everybody understands this, all right? If you don't understand it or asleep, hopefully the person next to you does. So, cuts and seams and then folding. Everybody kind of okay with that right there. So we already went through most of the concepts. The next concepts are textile density, overlapping, and 0 to 1 space. So first thing is textile density. So that was our next stage. So we did our cuts, we did our unfolding, and we'll actually take one piece and kind of show you the step-by-step process. But how many people remember what textile density is? Exactly, making sure that our textual or our pixel density is the same ratio across all our shells. How many people remember what a shell is? What is a UV shell? What's a UV shell? I'm gonna start pointing at people. What's a UV shell? I like that, just pointing at people. I'm just happy that you're taking notes. I'm glad, it makes me happier in the world to see people take notes. That is the main thing that I like seeing people do. So, what's a UV shell? A cluster of UVs. So pretty much a UV shell is pretty much any UV that is connected to other UVs. So if they're connected, they form a shell. All right. So we're gonna go right here. I accidentally got rid of that cut, so I'm gonna add that back in. I'm gonna find out where it's at. Actually, let's find out where the back is. Actually, logically, should we even care where the back is? If we're using our 3D knowledge, should I have to make sure where the back is right now, or what can I do? What could I do instead of having to go and bring everything back and figure out where the back is on my coil? What else could I do? Logically, now that we understand kind of a little bit of the 3D world. Mirror it, not quite. Check those. So if we get out of the concept of like this is just kind of like, spitballing and saying, as an artist, we're modelers, we're lazy. So instead of me bringing everything back and figuring out where the back of my coil is, I could just turn it around. All right, so I can put my seam anywhere and then just move it later. That has nothing to do with right here. It's just to show you, like, different things that we can do as artists once we get a little bit more comfortable in 3D. So, tools of the trade. All right. So, with that said, let's go and I'll make that cut. Make that cut. Because who cares? I can just turn this around later. And let's go and find the other one and unfold. All right, so we got everything laid out right here. Let's go ahead and straighten it up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and save as. All right, so first, before we get into textile density, let's go ahead and straighten this out. How would I want to straighten this out first? So I have this one selected. What should I probably do first? Yeah, rotate it. So I'm going to pick either U or V and just try to line up as much as possible. So if I do this direction, then I try to get this as straight up and down as much as possible. If I want to do along the V, I just get that as straight as possible. Now, here's where I may run into issue, which I didn't run into an issue. All right, so let me actually make this a little bit lower. Sometimes the tips like this right here will not get into that threshold, and I get a little wonkiness right here. So as an artist, we have to go in there and just kind of make those adjustments. So I'll just grab those, kind of turn them. And move them around. Pop quiz, what is a hotkey to translate something in the UV editor? W, it's the same thing. So translate, rotate, scale, works the exact same way inside of the UV editor. Likewise, if we want to use the B key as well too, that works as well too. So everything that you can really use in your 3D view, you can also use inside of your viewport. So it's the same hotkeys. Same way with the shift right click and the control right click. So move that down, that as close as possible. And now, even though it was working perfectly fine with the 40, now when I do the 30, it lays down pretty flat. So that is, again, messing around with our UVs enough so that our tools can actually work with them properly. Same way right here, going good. And I'm not straighten UVs. And that looks good enough. All right, so now we have them straightened. Let's go and start doing textile density. So what if I said for you to actually get textile density right, what you need to do is pull up that grid, start counting the different squares that are on one UV shell, and then go and make sure that that same number of squares are on the other shells. That would be dumb, all right? So this is where you get to your textile density tool. That used to be the old way. All right, so if we go right here to transform, we can open it up, and at the very bottom of our transform tool pack, we have textile density. And we have a couple things that we can be aware of. So first, map size. We already talked about it earlier in this class. What should probably go there? So our map size. What? Not 0 to 1. 1080, close. Yes, so 1080 is our resolution, but you're right. So we were probably, yeah, look, yeah, smaller one. So probably 1024, since that is probably what's going on right there. So I don't know if anybody noticed so far is our 0 to 1 space right there. What shape is it making? So that 0 to 1 box right there, I just kind of ruined it right there. What shape is that making? A square. Does anybody see any correlation between that square and those resolutions I showed you earlier? The 512 by 512, the 1024 by 1024, those are square dimensions as well too, because that all pertains to that square right there. So everything feeds into it. So we already figured out, based on how our object is in our shot, that 1024 would be fine enough, all right? Now in production, we give us a little wiggle room, and sometimes we will go up a size just because, you know, like when they shot Jurassic Park, they didn't think about making a 4K version of it or something like that. So we kind of like to future-proof ourselves. We'll probably do 2048. So as long as you're doing 1024, 2048, you're fine. And that's where we plug in. So, and again, if you have any questions or you don't understand what I'm saying, please raise your hand. So right here, map size, that's where we put that 2048. And now it's saying to itself in that 0 to 1 space, that is 2048 by 2048, which means when I get the textile density, which I select an object and hit get, it will give me the accurate reading for that right there. So it's like 14.9. That's about like the textile range that it's actually getting. So, anything in particular, why would I pick that UV shell to get my textile density? What? Exactly. Same thing with everything that we do. What do we do when we set up our reference? What? She said, anybody over here? What about you? What do we usually do when we set up our reference? We scale it, but do we scale up the front image and then go to the side image and scale, and then go back over to the front and scale again? Or what do we do? Close. We pick a lead image and we say that is the one that is important, and we'll scale everything up to that right there. That's the same thing with right there. We pick a lead shell, and we pick this because, why would we pick the side of that coil? Takes up the majority of the object, but also think of it as you're the audience. Wouldn't that be the first thing you probably noticed? Like, especially if there's a label there or something like that, that would be the first thing you would notice. So we just kind of base everything off that. Now, the end result will always be the same, but it's good to always have that. What is the lead? What is my selling point? What is the main thing that everybody's going to be looking at? Use that concept always, especially when it comes to, like, you know, later on when you're doing assets for your demo reel or assets for your portfolio. You have to make sure that you're paying attention to what is going to catch that person's eye, because there's a ton of stuff going through and you have to be aware of what people are looking for. So with that right there, I'm going to go ahead and scale this up a little bit more. All right. And then, like I said, we're going to hit get. We're going to get that information, and then I can just select everything else and hit set. So we get our textile density, and then we hit set, and it will size these to be the same textile density as this right here. So stepping through this again, we go to transform. We set our map size, 2048. So either 1024 or 2048, just pick one. Then we pick our lead shell. So the thing that's going to probably catch our eyes the most. And then we hit get. And then we can select all the other pieces and then hit set. Now we have a consistent textual density throughout the whole entire object. Sweet, awesome, yeah. No longer having to count pixels, not Digital Foundry, you know. All right, so Now, the last stage, which encompasses two things. One, getting everything into the 0, 1 space, and two, making sure that it's not overlap. For this project, we're going to say no overlapping whatsoever. All right, make sure that everything is inside the 0, 1 space, no overlapping. That's because we're doing something called a bump map, and we don't need scratches from the bottom of your coil also showing up elsewhere on your coil. All right, we want to make sure that everything gets its own information. So, how many people like Tetris? All right, that's pretty much UVs. We need to get these into the 0, 1 space without any overlapping, but also taking up as much space of this as possible. Why would we want to take up as much space as possible? Not easy to work with. All right, so let's think about what goes in that 0, 1 space. What? The paint, the texture. All right, so with that logic, so it's not covered up by the UV shell. What's going on with that? It's not being used. All right. And yes, it's very easy to just go and that right there. But what's the point of having a 2048 map using a couple race? It's not like my game console is saying that as, oh, they're only using part of that. It's still the same memory. We're wasting resources. So if we're going to be using something that big, we got to make sure that we're actually using it. Use it up. Smoke them if you got them. All right, so with that said, if I wanted to start moving these around, I would just go and grab this and start scaling that down, right? Or I could just scale it up, start maximizing that, right? Yes? How many people say yes? How many people say no? Yes, exactly. Why would I want to do them all together? Yes, yeah, I spent all that time doing that textile density, right? So by scaling them individually like that, I'm doing my work. So that's where we get into that right there. All right, so I'll start scaling this all up as one until this is barely fitting in here. So that looks good. Now, with the space I have left, I'm going to start trying to cram the rest of these in here. Now, I don't want to randomly start dropping these in here. I have to do something called making my UVs readable, right? Can anybody guess what that means? Can you guess what readability on a UV map is? You're exactly on the right path. So what she said is being able to tell where everything is. But let's break that down a little bit simpler. If I'm looking at my coil UV right here, logically, what would that be? I'll use this, my mouse, so on I can see that. So here's my shell for my coil, the side of the coil. Logically, what would this area be? What? Not the baseline. The bottom, all right? So that's what I'm talking about, is that, like, you know, when you are doing your UV map, make sure that it's readable. Like if something's supposed to be the bottom of an object, kind of put it at the bottom. Same way if there's a top, or if there's areas that are kind of close to each other, arrange them in a way that is readable. Because here's the thing, modelers, we lay out our UVs. But unless we're in a small studio, we're not the people that are texturing it, all right? We're usually sending that over to the next person in the pipeline. And they don't want to sit there and go like, what the hell is this? This is not a time for you to go all Picasso on your UVs. So we want to make sure that anything that is, you know, has a top and a bottom, that we're arranging it in like a top and bottom. So this is our top, this is our bottom. This is, let's say, our top rim right here. So let me make sure that that is the top right there, which it is not. So we need to rotate that. And you can just select it and look at what's going on. So look, top to top. So we can go right here and rotate. So if we go into our transform tools, we also have a rotate right here. I like using this instead of using this, mostly because this kind of has a lock on it. So I can just go right here, click it 90 degrees, click it 90 degrees, and it keeps it flat. And then I'll just move that to be the top right here. It's not fitting there, so I'll just go and scale that in. But I don't want to scale in like this because it's just kind of yanking it around. So what could I probably do with my pivot? Move it, exactly. So again, the same thing I can do with my vertexes, I can do it right here. So I'll just move that to one of my vertexes right here. So that way I scale from that point. Scale in. Probably move that down. All right, so we got our top ridge right here, looks like. Yep. I'll probably put that right next to a top ridge right there. Now we can get these super close. So as long as you're like separated by at least a few pixels, we're good. And then we can put that one right there. So that's our final stage, which is actually our second to last final stage. All right, so we got in the 0-1 space, we got without any overlapping, and we're trying to maximize how much we're covering. We still have some empty areas, and we'll talk about how we combat that in a little bit. But there's one last thing that we haven't really addressed, which is how many people remember polygons and how they have normals? All right. Same way with UVs, they can actually face the opposite direction. So this is where we have to make sure that it's actually facing the right direction. And the reason why we want to do that is because, yeah, we want to do it because it's the proper way, but like let's say we put a label on it and we put the word cat on it. Well, if it's facing the wrong way, what's it going to say? Tack, yes. That's a funny way, right? But also we start getting into things called like a normal map or a bump map, which it depends on which direction we want it to go in and out. If it's flipped the wrong way, it will show our detail reverse. So it's almost a mirror world. So to see that, we need to go right here to view, shaded, hit the option box. View, shaded, option box. And then right here, color mode, change that to front and back facing. The reason why you have to do that is because when we use our 3D Kenso tool, it actually flips it to the multicolor for us by default. So once we do front and back facing, we can hit apply. And then we'll properly shade our stuff. So blue means it's facing the right way. It's facing towards us. Red means that it's facing away from us. So it's going to show stuff in reverse. Can anybody guess what purple is? Inside? Close. Can anybody take a guess of what purple is? Exactly. So she was right there. Faces facing each other. So essentially what it is that you have a red on top of blue. All right. So that usually means that you have UV shells on top of each other. All right. So that's a good indicator. So the real colors are red and blue. We do get emails about like, why is this purple? It's because more than likely you have it on top of each other, which is an indicator that you probably need to make another cuts and lay out some more. All right. So that right there is your final step for that part right there. All right, so let's kind of break it down from there. I know it was a lot of steps because we've been talking about for at least it's 2:30 because I'm getting a calendar update. All right, so the first stage is what? What do we have to do on our object before we can UV? Finish it. 1. What's 2? Fix problem geometry. 3. Where's 3? Reset UVs. How do we reset UVs? Yes. Select our UVs and then use camera-based selection, or we can use planar projection. The idea is that we're resetting them and making sure that everything is sewn back together. Remember, when we model, when we start like adding in like cuts and extrusions, that jacks up our UVs. We don't want to start using that. We don't want to use the default UVs. We want to make sure that we reset. All right. The next stage, from there, we can start cutting. We gotta look for areas where we can see from one axis, and then areas where we have to actually go around and do like a cylindrical projection. So if you need to, go ahead, project from the Y or project from the X and start seeing where your checkers fall off, all right? And then that's a good indicator of where you need to make a cut. From there, we can go and just select all our UVs. If we're happy with our cuts, we can go and hit unfold. Next stage, if stuff needs to be straightened, we straighten it. What do we do after straighten? Anybody remember? Textile density. So textile density is next, and then we scale down to get everything in the 0 to 1 space without any overlapping, and we try to maximize that space as much as possible. And then last thing is we just make sure that it's facing the right way. It sounds like a lot of steps. A lot of them, though, you can do in like 3 or 4 seconds. So once you get used to this, you can actually UV pretty quick. Like if you understand the concepts enough, it should only probably take you about maybe 6 to 8 hours to get your coil done, UVing, just starting out. Now, with that said, that does go exponentially up if you decide to skip the whole cleaning up process and not resetting your UVs. So make sure that you're trying to hit up our Hangouts as much as possible. Talk to me and Brian, talk to Sarah, talk to Marcus. I think also Chris may be in there right now. I'm not sure. Also, those different things. But let's talk about a few things right here. Does anybody want to try to lay something out, or does anybody just want to take a breather? Does anybody want to try to lay something out or take a breather? Try. Sweet. All right, let's do that. Because a lot of people are usually sometimes like, this is enough information for the day. All right, so let's go ahead and bring this back. Shift fine. And then I'm going to save this. Create. Go into the run place. Save as. 4. All right, so. I have kids, so we watch a lot of that CoComelon where it's just like, Johnny. All right, so who wants to do this one? Who wants to do the screw? All right, so first stage is what? Is it done? I'm pretty sure it's done. I did. All right, so next stage is what? Wait. Oh, are we getting ahead of ourselves? Clean up. So let's make sure we can go right here. And I'll hit the cleanup tool. Face with more than 4 sides, face with holes, laminate faces, bam, bam, bam. And we're getting nothing. Something's getting selected though. So I may not be as perfect as I think. Ooh. Eating a little bit of my humble pie. All right, so right there. Oh yeah, it's selecting that. All right, so we'll get to that in a little bit, or I'll just fix it later. That's not the purpose of this. All right. So this is clean. This is finished. Next stage, step 3. Reset UV. So we can go right here, go to UVs, and I like to do camera projection. The reason why I don't like doing planar projection is because, go right here, planar, and X. It just collapses way too much stuff down onto itself, and you can kind of lose track of where everything is. At least with camera base, it kind of, you know, I can see everything. This is a personal preference. If that other way makes sense to you, do that. All right. So with that right there, I'm gonna go and UV, camera based. Now we are ready to start cutting. So what should we do? We can do a planar first, or we can do cylindrical. So where should we start? Does anybody need a checkered pattern on here? Yes, please. All right. So I'll go right here. And just so we can help the checkered pattern, I'll just go right here, planar mapping, and down the X, because we're looking down the barrel of the X. No, we're not. Wrong thing. I click the wrong thing. Hit apply. And then we're going to scale this down. All right, so kind of look around. All right, so I'm going to get you a hint. How many people are worried about that corkscrew, that like threading? That's not going to be factored in whatsoever. All right, if we understand the ideas of projection and the idea of that seesaw of whether or not we can do stretching and cuts, and then also the factor of how prominent is in our shot, this only takes about 2 or 3 cuts. So first one, give you all easy one. What cut do I make? All right, is everybody okay with extra edge? I should put like some real money on this right here. So everybody's like, no, don't do that. All right. So is everybody okay with the outer edge right here? Okay, so let's go. And what tool do I use? Where's that? What? UV? 3D cut and sew tool. Exactly. All right, so now I can grab my outer edge. And let me see if I can do something real quick. It wasn't working on my other computer, but it may work here. Let me go to polygons and edge width, and then try to turn this up so y'all can get a clearer view. But it probably is not going to work. Nope, it didn't. All right, there's a way to like actually make your edges thicker. Y'all probably don't want to do that because if you make them too thick, they'll start overlapping each other. But for y'all to be able to see it a little bit better, it works here. But all right, that's a little side note. All right, so where else should I make a cut? So we got the end, the underside. All right, so we can go right here along the bevel. So where's a good place for me to make a cut along the bevel? What's a good rule of thumb that I said with bevels? Yep. Usually the middle of the bevel is like a good indicator, because usually that means that there's a big change in direction. All right. And that's usually where our projection falls off. So I can do that. All right, where should I cut next? The next edge, this one? Okay, the outer edge right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and, no, right there, double click. Now you gotta make sure that you're double clicking. That way it gets the whole entire edge loop. And another thing that you should also be wary of, all right, and this will happen on your blacktop, is that when you make that cut and you're sure that you should make that cut is made, make sure that it changes color. All right, you probably noticed that it went from purple to red right there. That's actually showing you that, hey, now it's a new shell. I will tell you that that will not happen on your blacktop, especially when you get to those platforms, just because of the edge flow around those platforms and how you probably did your bevel. All right, and here's the thing about UV shells. If there is even one microscopic edge that connects them, they're still considered one shell. So when you make it and you're sure that you made that cut, you're not able to like separate them, go look for that little tiny edge that's spinning it together. All right, so the top. All right, so we're at the top. All right, so let me say that to the whole entire class. And I think what you said was, we could probably take this entire top, including the groove, and lay that out as one, right? Yeah. How many people are okay with that? How many people don't care? Well, seems like one hand in the back, and I'm asking the opposite like answer, and people are just not raising hands. It's okay. All right, so yes, because again, we have to ask ourselves, really, who's going to be looking at the inside of this right here? So we could probably get away with going right here and double clicking around. And I'm just following my bevel. And I'll tell you honestly, when it comes to stuff like this is why you want to pay attention to your edge flow, because it makes selecting seams way easier. All right, so we got top, our side, bottom right here, this bottom right here, and then the very tip. Any other cuts that we need to make? Or are we good at UV or unfold? What? All right, so she just asked, did we do the unfold phase between our two projection types, which are two projection types that we're kind of thinking about is what's flat and what's round? And the answer is no, because the thing is that when you try to unfold something that can't unhook like that, that's probably where you're going to crash. All right, because again, it's going to try to figure out how to take this bottle and squish that flat. So you were exactly right. So I'm gonna go right here. I'm gonna hit save as, just because I haven't done it in a while, and hit 5. And yes, this is where I would make my side cuts. So go right here, and so that little threading that we were so worried about, just gonna go right here and select that, and that's going to be our only other cut along that thread. That will lay out perfectly fine. Same way, I'm just going to go right here, make that cut on that. And now what I like to do is I'll usually just go right here. First, turn off the checkers. And I like to separate my shells, just to kind of get them organized. So go right here, go in UV mode. How do I quickly select my shell? Yep, well, yeah, we could double click on the UV. So we can go to any UV and double click on it. And that will select all the UVs that are selected, connected to it. So I can pull that over, keep on double clicking. And essentially what I'm doing is taking all the ones that I know are laying flat, like the top of this right here, the bottom of that right there, and the bottom of that right there, and just kind of putting them off to one side. And then taking the two that I know are going to be cylindrical mapping, because again, these are just long cylinders. And I just kind of separate them like that. And now we unfold, right? Save. Yes. Why do we want to save? It takes a while, and you'll actually see like a little thing pop up. So save as. So 6. Continue. And then go right here, select everything, and hit unfold. It will go through, and we saw that little progress bar. And we just look at the fruits of our endeavors. So that one right there, that's our top, including that part right there. And if we look, that's actually looking pretty good. Same way with our little threading right here. If I turn that, that's looking pretty good. All right, so all that is fine. What's my next step? All right, so does this one need to be straightened? Let me get a little bit closer so we can look at it. So this is where we have to ask ourselves a couple things. One, we can try to straighten it. Let me go ahead and kind of pop into this side right here so we can kind of see what's going on. So this right here, we could probably straighten. So I'm gonna go ahead and probably save, but we have to be careful about some things. Can anybody think about like what we have to be careful about? By crashing, that's one, so I'm gonna do that right there, save. I will give you a hint. When we do the brackets and we have to straighten it, we have to be careful about one of the details on there. The notches, you're correct, and the hole. The thing is that like we have kind of like a curvature right there. Straightening will destroy that curvature. So we have to kind of deselect those areas. I'm gonna go right here, trying to straighten this up as much as possible. And it looks fine enough. All right, so what I'm gonna do is, with that selected, I'm gonna hold down Control and deselect those notches. All right. We go ahead and type in 40. I'm gonna see what strain UV does. So I'm gonna just go right here and hit strain UVs and see how that looks. It's a little wonky. I can go in there and hand fix that a little bit. Another thing that I can do is, how many people notice next to the strain UVs with the 40, which is what? What is that 40? That's my threshold. Also next to it is UMV, where I can actually lock it to only do strain in one direction or the other. So we can actually try turning these off. So let me try strain U and see what I get. So not bad, but and sometimes we can get a better result. by playing around with that. Now with this right here, we're not, but I want to make you aware of it. If you're not getting like exactly great the result that you want, try turning off both directions and try doing it in one of each direction. I'm gonna go right here and strain UV. All right, so that's looking good. So now I can just go right here and tweak this out a little bit. All right. And this right here just needs to be tweaked out as well too. All right, that's looking fine to me. All right, so what's our next path? So we straightened, we unfolded, we did our cuts. What do we do now? What's up, man? We scale it close. Textile density, yes, we gotta make sure that everything is the same ratio. So scaling's the right idea. We just need to make sure that everything is consistent with each other. All right, so we're gonna go right here. We're gonna pick the area that probably is the thing that we're gonna see the most. It could be either the screw top right here or this. In this case right here, with it being a bolt, I'll probably just pick the biggest part. And then we go into transform. And then where do we go in transform? Online, where do we go in transform? Drink some water. So we scroll down transform, and then we will see textile density. So from scratch, how will you proceed with this? What is the first thing that we need to do on textile density? All right, so we got to think about how big of a texture we need to have. So if we look at the bottom right here, that's our map size. That is what we're playing for. So our map size is where we put in what size of texture we're going to do, just so that we get the right reading. That's like if I was trying to take your temperature, like I would have to make sure that I set Fahrenheit instead of Celsius so I can get an idea of what I'm trying to do. Same way here. That textual density doesn't matter anything to me unless I put the right texture size in it. So we're going to do 2048. And now when I hit my shell and get the textile density, it will give me an accurate reading. So right now I have a textile density of 102, which is it's taking up a range of around 102 pixels on my 2048 texture. And now I can select everything and hit set. Now everything has the same textile density. All right, so now everything has right textile density. What do I need to do now? Scaling, yes. All right, so we have to scale it to fit into the 0, 1 space, and we want to take up as much space as possible. So I'll go right here. And keep on scaling until I get that in range. I can go right here, and I'm going to use my rotate tools instead of transform. I'm going to just kind of rotate that around. Same with right here. I'm gonna just kind of fit that in. Fit that in. Fit that in. All right, so now it's in the 0, 1 space without any overlapping, and it has the right textual density. What would be our last stage? What's the last thing that we need to be aware of? Saving? Yep. When in doubt, say save. Yes, exactly. So how do we do that? View, shaded, exactly, and hit the option box. And then we're looking for front and back facing. We just turn that on, and now we can hit apply, and we look to make sure that everything's blue. All right. So that is the process that we want to do. And as you get used to that process, and like I said, you want to make sure that you're taking notes and kind of writing down, like, the steps of these processes. So you can almost use that as a checklist. Did I cut in my scenes? Did I reset my stuff? Did I cut in my scenes? Did I unfold? So you can do that until it's second nature. And then you'll realize that you can go through these different pieces and fly through them. All right. It just takes a little bit of making sure that you're going through the right launch process. That's the best way I can put it. All right. How's everybody feeling about that? How many people are ready to, on Friday, to kind of walk through and do the scissors? That's what we're going to do. All right. Couple? All right. So main thing I want you to do is start trying to UV your stuff. All right. If you're not ready to UV, honestly, make sure that at least you're trying to get your stuff cleaned up so that it's prepared for UV. Now, the last thing that we can, I'm going to go over before we go, and we're not going to get too much into it, but the idea of this right here, which is if we look at my screen, look at that bolt right there, we got a lot of dead area, right? All right. Here's the thing. There's two different ideas of how to go about UVing your stuff. So we right now have a coil. We have the black top, the blue top, the wire harness, all that stuff right there. All right. So to skip ahead a little bit later in this month, our UVs are not really so much giving the information of the texture to our model. It's giving it shader. The shader is something that tells our Maya how to make our object look. So when we put a shader on it, we tell that shader, hey, this is supposed to look like metal, or this is supposed to look like plastic, things like that. That information from the UV is passed on to that right there. So what does that mean to you? All right. So for every time we take an object and have it fill up the 0, 1 space, we're essentially giving that object one map. So far, we've been giving one map to the blue body. We've been giving a separate map to the bolts. And if we continue this process, we have one object that has like 20 different maps, all right? Can anybody see like an issue with that, especially with video games? Too many maps, too much memory, all right? So this is why I call just a bunch of maps. This is where we just make sure that everything's in the 0 to 1 space by itself. What we want to do is instead is something called collage. Now, how many people have heard of the word collage? All right, everybody should have made one collage in their life. I'm surprised that it's not like one of the projects in your core classes. Just like one of those give me projects. Go make a collage of something. All right, so what does that mean? That means that we take every one of these objects and lay them out in the 0, 1 space without any overlapping and fit them all in there. So that way we only have to make one map for the whole entire object. And that's what this looks like. If we go right here, open, like I said, Betty Crocker, already got one done, is instead of having one thing per object, we instead take up as much space as possible and fit everything in here with the same textual density without any overlapping. That's where your true Tetris skill comes from. That way, we can actually make sure that we are maximizing our resources and better suiting ourselves for both types of pipeline, for production and for gameplay. All right, so we can try to think of anything else. A good and insane version of this, how many people have ever seen how id has done their texture work? How many people have looked in, like, the pipeline that they've done for Rage or the newer Doom, things like that? All right, they do something called mega textures, where they literally try to fit everything inside the level into one texture map. All right, so it is something that, like, definitely you want to make sure that you are paying attention to and that you're aware of. Any questions about that? I always like to throw out that tidbit about id because it's just the neat people. They do crazy things. All right, so any questions? All right, so like I said, if you're not ready to UV, make sure that your models are at least those 3 steps, which is make sure that they're done, make sure that they're cleaned up, and make sure that you reset your UVs. And then from there, start checking out the videos. But on Friday, we're gonna walk through, like, how to UV that scissors. It's gonna be like Monday, where literally it could be a short lab or a long lab, depending on how y'all answer. All right, again, it's just a review to see that you understand. And then likewise, I will post on Discord the email that I want people to send me their work. And that way we can kind of go through it together as well too. So y'all can kind of see some real world cases of how to clean things up. Outside of that, lecture over.